In 1855, deep in the Rajmahal foothills, Santhal farmers watched as outsiders arrived to claim the forest land they had spent years cultivating. When these farmers could not pay the high new taxes, officials seized their property, triggering an armed rebellion known as the Santhal Hul. To understand this breaking point, we have to look at this map of Hindustan. Over the previous century, the British East India Company rapidly absorbed these fragmented territories, rewriting local laws and extracting wealth across the subcontinent. The millions living within these shifting borders resisted this economic and political overhaul. Armed pushback erupted across every demographic, from displaced royalty to rural artisans. The massive 1857 uprising stands as the climax to 100 years of smaller, escalating fires that the British administration consistently ignored. One of the earliest organized resistance movements began in Bengal in the 1770s, following a famine that killed nearly a third of the region's population. This became known as the Sannyasi Fakir Rebellion. The East India Company had introduced policies that heavily taxed and restricted the movement of wandering Hindu and Muslim ascetics. These religious figures responded by attacking British treasuries and tax collectors. Further west on the Chota Nagpur Plateau, British land laws introduced dikus, outside moneylenders and landlords brought in to extract wealth directly from indigenous tribal homes. For centuries, these communities had managed their own land. When colonial laws restricted forest access and outsiders began confiscating property for unpaid debts, the pressure sparked massive revolts, like the Coal Uprising in 1831 and the Santhal Rebellion in 1855. This illustration captures the stark technological contrast of the era. Tribal warriors, fighting for their livelihoods, faced the imperial firepower of British muskets with traditional bows and swords. While the British military eventually suppressed these early revolts, the joint actions of Hindu sannyasis and Muslim fakirs established that religious and ethnic communities would bridge social divides to fight a common colonial oppressor. That same exploitation was tearing through the agricultural heartland. British planters imposed a predatory loan system on peasant farmers, known as dadon. These dadon loans legally bound farmers to grow cash crops like indigo instead of the food crops their families needed to survive. Once a farmer accepted the advance, they were trapped in an inescapable cycle of debt. When the exploitation became unbearable, peasants across Bengal united in the Indigo Rebellion. The planters' retaliation was so severe it inspired the play Neel Darpan, which exposed colonial agricultural policies to the wider public. By the 1850s, the rural economy was a powder keg. This agricultural crisis quickly became a military one, as the East India Company's army was recruited directly from these heavily taxed peasant families. The Indian sepoy was essentially a peasant in uniform. As seen in this photograph, the Indian soldiers were kept standing behind the seated British officers, yet they carried the exact same social grievances as their families in the villages. The tension snapped in 1857 over this weapon, the new Enfield rifle. Soldiers were required to bite open cartridges rumored to be greased with cow and pig fat, violating the religious requirements of both Hindu and Muslim soldiers. After Mangal Pandey attacked his officers in Barrackpore to protest the new rifles, the mutiny spread. The military revolt merged with the political fury of local rulers, whose kingdoms had been seized under the doctrine of lapse. Displaced royals stepped in to take command. Leaders like Begum Hazrat Mahal, whose kingdom of Awadh had been annexed just a year earlier, directed the resistance in Lucknow and warned Indians not to trust British promises of pardon. As shown here, Rani Lakshmibai rode into battle to reclaim her annexed kingdom of Jhansi. She led her forces from the front lines, eventually earning the respect of her opponents as the bravest of the rebel leaders. This engraving of the combat at the Redan Battery illustrates the scope of the war. A coalition of soldiers, peasants, and princes pushed the British out of major cities across northern India in a grueling, subcontinent-wide conflict. In 1857, frustrations from the forests, from the farms, and the palaces converged, turning localized military mutinies into a violent, broad-based war across the subcontinent. The British counteroffensive recaptured key cities through heavy reinforcements. By mid-1858, the rebellion was militarily crushed, leaving behind physical scars like these bullet-riddled ruins of the Lucknow Residency. The uprising forced an immediate political change. The British government permanently abolished the East India Company, stripping the corporation of its control over India. Administration was transferred directly to the British Crown under Queen Victoria. To prevent future revolts, the colonial government reorganized the army, emphasizing social and religious divisions between Indian soldiers. While the uprisings were suppressed, this century-long escalation of resistance proved that Indians could cross religious and social divides to fight a common enemy, laying the critical psychological foundation for the modern independence movement.